Hey, everybody. Well, this is such a great stage. This is such a lovely venue. I've had the pleasure to speak on this stage a couple of times. Anyone ever been to Reasons or Flash on the Beach? Hey, some old school people here. Nice. And it's great. It's such a lovely stage. But the downside is that you can really easily see when the audience is kind of sparse. So it's not sparse. It's good. Thank you very much for coming to this session. Much appreciated. And I didn't have the post-lunchtime slot, which I'm very grateful for. Thank you for that, Luke and Michelle. So before we get going, this is the book that, as Michelle mentioned, that I wrote and published. Well, I didn't publish it. It was published by Quarto. Came out earlier this summer. And I thought, in the spirit of a little bit of fun audience participation, if anyone would like a copy of the book, I'm going to give this one away. And I was thinking about what we should do to, kind of make it fun. And I thought I couldn't really come up with anything. So what I decided to do in the end is, if you go and sign up to my aforementioned newsletter, that URL there, elliotjstocks.com/newsletter, what I'll do is at the end of the session, as long as like more than one person has done that, we'll pick a random number out of those new subscribers, and I will give that away. You could also do that and then unsubscribe immediately, but obviously you would not sleep very well tonight, so I wouldn't expect you to do that. Anyway, right, so design systems, Figma. As a designer, someone working in design systems, what's the worst feeling? What's the thing that really just feels horrible when it happens? For me, personally, it's when you've set everything up really nicely. It's all good. You thought about every possible permutation of your components, and you've got a wonderful, beautiful system, and then suddenly you realize that something needs changing, and you have to hit that dreaded detach component command. That's the thing that really hurts. Now, I've applied this to life in general by not having much of a plan, not coming up with a system in the first place, and therefore not worrying too much about it failing. So that's the last bit of Figma and design systems we're going to deal with in this talk today. I'm instead going to talk to you about this mess that you see on screen, these arrows. You'll be very glad to know that we're not going to be talking about Bezier curves, because as you can see, I'm terrible at them. But what this represents, and what the picture that I hope I will paint over the next few minutes, is a little bit of an introduction to some of the work that I've done, and I've had quite a few side projects that have sort of permeated my work life. And now that I've been a designer for 20 years, I can kind of look back with the gift of hindsight and see what worked and what didn't work. And I've been guilty of telling people for many years that you should follow your passions and you should do what you love. And if I'm being really honest with myself, I kind of, it was a very privileged position to be in, and it was not necessarily helpful to say that in a lot of ways. But now that I'm old and I can actually look back, I can tell you that there is concerted proof that following your passions and your side projects that you really love doing will actually lead to the kind of work you want to do. And so I'm going to draw those lines. I'm physically going to draw those lines today. Where it started for me was in early music-making efforts. So I made some really terrible music when I was a teenager and in my early 20s. But when I was doing that, it kind of got me into design as a whole. It's very, very much the web to begin with. This is kind of where it all started. I was working as a sales assistant in Virgin Megastore in a year between school and going to uni. That's me over on the left. That's what I look like without all the hair. And we were very lucky. There were a bunch of us in the store who were kind of musicians, quote unquote. That was very generous to call us that. But the manager of the store let us put our CD, which is dating this, obviously, out on the actual shop floor. So I designed the POS, the point of sale, for that, which you can see in the background there, the cover for that, and a website on this WYSIWYG editor that was called Homestead. It's really, really old. It was a really horrible thing, but that started me on this course for what web design was and what design was as a whole. So music also kind of allowed me to start exploring all these other design things. So I started getting into flash sites and designing flash sites for for myself, for my own musical project, and for friends' bands. So when I finished university, I graduated with a portfolio, not really of the university work per se, but all this kind of extracurricular music-based web stuff that I'd been building up. And that got me my first job at EMI Music, which was the dream job for me at the time. You know, I was like, what, 21, 22, and I got to suddenly design all of these sites for like actual proper artists and bands and stuff. So you'll see this is a Flash site for Joss Stone, which was the very first site I built in Flash for EMI. And you can see it's totally guilty of all the things of that age. There's pixel fonts, there's little sliders with inertial, this kind of thing. There probably aren't too many of you who can even remember these days. But yeah, that was how we built the web back in like 2004. And yeah, my God, that was 20 years ago. Wow, excuse me while I just have a small existential crisis on stage about that being 20 years ago. God. But it was fun. I've moved on from Flash to doing stuff with iframes, and we used Flash to do like these little music players. And I got to work with Massive Attack, which was kind of one of the highlights of my time there, one of my sort of favorite bands. And that was really cool, despite it being a Flash site. And then I got into web standards and started doing some stuff. I was in the music industry for a little bit longer and then joined Carsonified and did some stuff there. And I was doing loads and loads of websites. Around this time with Brooklyn Beta, as the first Brooklyn Beta site, I also did the branding for it as well. And I was really enjoying jobs like that where I could do the actual website. And also, this is back in the day when a web designer meant like building it as well, and long before we split web design off into UX and UI, and long before we uttered the phrases like design systems or anything like that. And I really enjoyed the fact that I didn't just have to be stuck within doing the web design side of things. I got to do bits of branding and stuff. This was for Ampersand, which happened here, and this was the first responsive site I did. And I was doing, alongside this work, little bits of print design at the time, which was a nice antidote to the web. But I didn't really know much about print. I'd done little CD covers and stuff like that, the odd flyer. But I really thought it would be fun to do something much more involved. Now, this is an early version of Smashing Magazine that I designed in one of my last sort of client projects at the time. But while this was going on, while I was doing these websites and little bits of print design, I started writing a lot about it. And I wrote a bunch of articles regularly for computerarts.net, all of these magazines that now sadly no longer exist. And I found I really enjoyed writing about it. I was blogging a lot as well and doing a lot of writing. And suddenly there was like design, but there was writing about design. That was kind of fun. And I started doing some speaking around a similar time as well. The writing side of things allowed me to get my first book deal. Now, this title hasn't aged well. It was not mine. It came from the publisher. I fought against it for the longest time. But it did allow me to become an actual real published author. So I kind of took that opportunity and wrote this book, which still exists. I've generally tried to distance myself from this, but you know, it was nice at the time, I guess. But so I was doing all this web-centric stuff and writing about web-centric stuff, but I wanted to do some more meaty print projects. And around about that time, web fonts were becoming a thing. It really felt like web design was kind of growing up, that we were becoming aware of typography and all of these things that we hadn't really been able to really get into with the state that the web was in currently at that point. So I decided to do something which was utterly ridiculous, and had I known what I know after having done it, I wouldn't have done it. But with youthful naivety, I decided to start a print magazine about typography. Now, I hardly knew anything about typography or about the type industry as a whole. I had a few heroes, people like Eric Spiekermann and Jessica Hirsch and Jason Santamaria and other folks that I wanted to speak to. So I emailed a bunch of folks and said, hey, I'm going to start this magazine. Can I interview you? And they all said yes, which was amazing and very daunting, and suddenly I had to go and produce this first issue of this magazine. And again, I knew only nothing about, or very little about print, very little about the subject matter, certainly nothing about all of the background stuff that goes into running a magazine or putting out a real-world physical object. So there was loads and loads and loads to learn. And through actually doing it, I just kind of had to learn it. So I did 8 issues of the magazine, which was always its intention. We interviewed 8 designers, illustrators, type designers, graphic designers, web designers, about their 8 favorite typefaces and their work and their career, laid it all out. I got to know some people like Eric Spiekermann, who became the resident typomaniac of the magazine, so he would give me feedback on all of my really bad typesetting, and that was obviously a really great person to have do that. We did loads of really fun, interesting things. So I was coming very much from this digital web side of things. And I thought, well, you know, if I'm going to do something with paper, I want it to be really special. So we had all these, each cover had like, you know, some embossing and some foiling and some die cut stuff like this. And just had loads and loads and loads of fun with it and learned a ton. One of the things I learned really early on was the very first issue, I laid out these kind of favorite spreads where everyone would pick their favorite typefaces, and I would set like a specimen. And I realized I was just really bad at designing that stuff. So from the second issue onwards, I commissioned another designer to do that. So I got John Tan to do for a few issues, and then another designer for the last 3 or so. Anyway, the magazine went well. As I said, we did 8 issues, and it sold out really quickly. Everyone seemed to had a small but very dedicated audience. And then a couple of years later, I did a Kickstarter campaign to bring the whole thing together into a book. And that was successfully funded. We raised a ton of money, which was great, and ended up with this big hardcover book. I don't know if Luke Tong is here, but that's his picture, and I forgot to credit him on this. But yeah, this real huge book, which put all of these magazines together, and there are no more of these left, sadly, now. I only have one myself, which I'm quite sad about. But doing this magazine project and then later the book kind of taught me all this stuff about all of the logistical, not very interesting stuff, but the kind of thing that you need to know if you want to put out a real product. And then while doing that, and while getting a little bit fed up with client work, I started this company with my friend Kia called Viewport Industries, and we used that as a kind of a test bed to run some events, to make a little iPhone app, to put out another big book, which was lots of interviews with folks in the tech industry at the time, to make a one issue of this kind of newspaper-like magazine. Now, around that time, while that was happening, Kia started working for Shopify, and I got approached by a company called Typekit, who had just been acquired by Adobe at the time, and they were a web font service, and they were just kind of transforming. And I joined Typekit as creative director and helped them turn Typekit from just a web font service into something that's part of the Creative Cloud and into desktop syncing, and much like the products that you know today, which is Adobe fonts. And that was great fun, because I got to design interfaces, and I got to do little print adverts and T-shirts and all kinds of stuff, and got to just mess around with all different kind of media, which is kind of how I liked it. And I learned loads about running a small team as well. That was really educational. So I was starting to kind of get this feel for what it was involved with running a team, and also running a project as well, and bringing real things into being. Sorry, excuse me. Oh, Scott wasn't wrong about the knees there. Definitely a table next year, please. All right. So when 8 Faces finished, I wanted to carry on doing a magazine. My wife, who is a writer and editor, wanted to for us to do something together as well. So we decided to create a lifestyle magazine called Largon, which we ran for 10 issues over 5 years. It's a wonderful, wonderful feeling, especially coming from a digital environment, to actually see a physical thing falling through people's letterboxes and then sending photos, or seeing them actually on shelves of real magazine shops around the world. Really, really thrilling feeling, and we loved it. Again, we spent a lot on making very high quality and stuff like that, so it would be worthwhile, something that you would want to put on your shelves and keep, rather than just kind of put in the recycling. And it was fun as well, because as well as all the organizational side of it, there was the creative side of designing it. I wrote a lot for it as well, edited it, took a load of photos for it, so that was all fun. Got to commission some really amazing photographers and illustrators, and just have a great time meeting a ton of really inspirational people. The website is still live on readlargon.com if you want to have a look at any of that. Now, I don't usually show this, and would appreciate people maybe not taking photos of these slides unless they're for your own personal use, but I want to talk a little bit about money, because I've always been very keenly said to everybody that, it's not about financial success. And after the magazine finished, we kind of had this sense of that it wasn't very financially successful. But it wasn't really until we kind of got those final sales and everything, and we thought, actually, let's work it out. Let's see what the deal is. So over the course of the magazine's lifetime, which was 10 issues over 5 years, it brought in £207,000, which sounds like a lot of money. It is a lot of money. That is a lot of money. That's wonderful. Very lucky to have been able to have a side project that would do that. Although it was, by this point, kind of almost my full-time job. I'd left Adobe in the end to actually focus on this. But unfortunately, it also costs lots to make. So you can see that there isn't actually a huge difference in those figures there. Now, we were very, very adamant that we wanted to pay illustrators, writers, editors, proofreaders, photographers, and obviously, as I said, use like kind of decent production values and stuff like that. So in the end, it made just shy of £15,000 profit, which again is not to be sniffed at. However, when you work out, you spread that over the issues and you spread that over the years and the months that we worked. Again, it was only myself and my wife who were working on it full time. It actually equated to, if we'd taken it as a salary, is £123 each per month. Which is probably not really your idea of financial success. But, so we were right to assume that. Oh, and I should also say that out of the sales that came in, 20,000 of that came from us selling foreign translation rights. So there was a Chinese edition and a Korean edition, which was, the Korean one especially was really, really beautiful. And so that just kind of came about. We didn't plan for that or anything. And so we're very fortunate that happened. And had that not happened, then we would have been, in the negative figures. But again, the fact that we were able to do this while balancing with other little bits of work as well meant that we could sort of take some of that risk. We could, do this project, and I'm so glad that we did. Even though, if you judge it by traditional successful metrics, it was not successful. I'm so glad that we did it. Absolutely no regrets whatsoever, because it has then led to a bunch of other projects. So, oh, sorry, I totally skipped over that, but you can see. But the legend is basically all of these lines represent design, and the solid one is type-specific design, and then stuff I've sort of learned from a sort of editorial perspective, speaking, organization and management, this kind of thing. So you can see it all there. But I've tried to articulate what learnings came from each project and how they fed into the next one. So after I left Adobe and while I was running Largon with my wife, I was also doing some other bits of work. I was doing, we did another book with a self-published thing with our friend Alex Hunt, who runs this travel channel called Attaché. I was working part-time as the creative director as a coffee roastery called Colonna. And I started getting involved with ClearScore, doing some, helping them commission a bespoke typeface for their brand. And then just before the pandemic, well, about a year before the pandemic, I went and worked for an agency in Shoreditch, working remotely, and doing kind of sort of acting as a design manager there. So I was learning all that stuff and doing these various different projects. But while all that was going on, I decided that I was going to become serious about music properly. So I'd done music all my life, but figured that the absolute best time to become really serious about music was after we just had our first baby. But for some reason, I thought that would work really well. So I put out this record as a kind of drawing a line in the sand. So I'm serious about making this music making project. So I make music as other form. This is the website, which is really, really outdated. I really need to update that. This is my discography on Spotify. If you want to have another look at lovely Spotify mix. Yeah, you can find it on all the usual streaming platforms. But having that on there, and I basically made a record label so that I could put my own music out there. But the thing about having a label is that then you can release other people's music. So during the pandemic, I decided to put out some other artists' music on my label, which is called Unknown Movements. And that's been really great fun to do. I mean, it's obviously a very, very small label, almost entirely digital, just a few select physical releases, I did a couple of like tapes before I started to feel really guilty about putting like unnecessary plastic out into the world. But from a design perspective, it was really fun. I was getting to do lots of different covers and stuff like that. This is a recent compilation that we put out. So where are we? Where's next? I can't see it on there. So, right. There was a brief tangent that actually happened just before I did the ClearScore stuff and whatnot, where I got kind of burned out and fed up with design. I can't quite remember, to be honest, what it was that made me feel that way, but I just sort of had enough. I wasn't loving it as much anymore. I just, on the magazine, had this kind of like, thinking about all this editorial stuff. And this advertiser in our magazine approached me and said, hey, I'm doing this new startup, it's this retail startup, this shop in Plano, Texas, which is this very random place. And it's called Neighborhood Goods. And do you want to come on board as the editorial director? And basically asked me if I could take the learnings that I'd learned from the magazines, especially Logom, and do that for this company. And they had a very sort of big editorial streak. It was a shop, but it had all this kind of online magazine-y stuff going on. So I said, yeah, that'd be fantastic. It was just the right time. I was just kind of like, felt like taking a bit of a break from design, and it was just perfect for about a month. Because then I really freaked out about the fact that I wasn't a designer. You know, I turned up at Texas at the passport control, and they're terrifying, of course, and they say, what do you do? And I said, and I thought, I can't say designer because I'm not designing anymore. I'm a writer, because that was the nearest catch-all umbrella term for what I was doing for them. And it felt so weird to say that, and I really, really freaked out. And then shortly after, then went back into doing some design stuff like the Clear Score and the agency in Shoreditch and stuff. But then the pandemic happened, and I did loads of shitty little jobs to kind of get by, as lots of us had to do. And then I was at this point where I was like, I wanted to do a big type project, and also kind of wanting to kind of sort of retreat into the woods and go away and write a book kind of thing. So I pitched this idea to Google. I knew someone who was working at Google Fonts and said, I've got this idea. I've been teaching these workshops for years. So all along while this has been going on, I've been speaking at conferences and teaching workshops online and in real life. And I wanted to condense these workshops into a new format. I was like, okay, what if we make a book and you guys sponsored the book? Because they were sponsoring loads of like type-themed projects at that time. So they're like, yeah, that's interesting. It's really interesting. But what if instead of a book, it's a website? And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, all right, fair enough. I'm like, what if it's not a website, but it's on Google Fonts' site? And to begin with, I was really skeptical because I was like, no, I wanted this to be my thing. And then I realized that they would throw a lot more time and money and effort at the project if we did that. So that became Google Fonts Knowledge, which is it's not like necessarily super exciting to look at. But if you go to Google Fonts and then, /knowledge, I basically wrote initially all of this content and got to do all of these nice little specimen graphics that's meant to be just showing you exactly, like, from very beginners typography principles right the way through to some more advanced stuff for things like variable fonts. There's a huge, great glossary there. Some of you may know that Google Fonts really been pushing the variable font side of things. So there's lots of variable stuff in there. And then over time, after it launched, stepped into more of like a sort of curatorial role, commissioning other writers, other designers to come on board and write their content. There's a really fascinating whole big section on designing Hangul, the writing system for Korea. And just had, but basically, I was really lucky. Got to have a really fun time just making fun sort of specimen graphics and writing all this stuff out there. And that was, that was good. And I did that for a couple of years up until early last year. While I was doing the Google stuff, I was doing some designs for a friend's record label called Unterwegs, who are in Berlin. And this is what some of those look like. And they sort of ended up getting, catching the eye of this guy, Luke Slater. For anyone out there is into techno, you may know Luke, who has been very active for many years. He has a label called Motorvolver. And we started working together with me doing the artwork for his label, which was really fun. This is a couple of recent releases from a couple of years ago, I think. And it's all fun designing actual records, actual real vinyl and stuff like that. And the cool thing about knowing a famous DJ when you're also making techno music is that you can pass that person some of your music and say, hey, just in case you want to play that at all. And then much to my surprise, this is a WhatsApp I got from him saying that he just played a track at Fabric, and I was like, wow, okay, that's amazing. And then I got this report from this service called A Slice, which is sadly just shut down. But just reporting where DJs have played your music. And on New Year's Eve 2022, Luke played it at Berghain in Berlin, the notorious Berlin nightclub. So that was amazing. That was like some real things. Some people had actually gone and like danced to my music via this weird route of design, of doing these designs for Luke. So that was cool. A couple of years ago, I got approached by a publisher, the publisher of the book, who had this series, this Universal series, where there's universal principles of UX and architecture and product design. There were quite a few of them, and said, hey, do you want to write the one about typography? And I said, yeah, I would love to. I'd love to. So I kind of okayed it with Google, who I was still writing for at the time. It's like, it's not going to be Google Fonts Knowledge in book form. It's going to be new material. And then that took a couple of years to do, because basically I said, I can't write a book about typography but not design it, because what if I write something in there about, using faux italics, and then the designer of the book makes this typographic mistake. So I kind of made a rod from my own back by designing and illustrating the book as well. But it was rewarding to do, even if it did kind of break me for a little bit. It looks like this inside. And these are photos taken by my friend Norman Posselt in Berlin. And again, it's really nice to have like a physical thing. And I've always, throughout all these years, I've really enjoyed kind of jumping between the physical media and digital media as well. And basically have a very short attention span and not really happy just doing one thing. And so the book is on Amazon. I took this screenshot yesterday. To show you, to compare this to the sexy web design one. And then I realized it's $16.99 at the moment, which is really cheap. So I would really like it if you didn't buy the book from Amazon. Okay, generally try and discourage folks from that. But I must admit, it is only $16.99 at the moment, so I wouldn't blame you if you did want to do that. I wouldn't blame you too much anyway. If you do want to find out any more about the book, it's on /book on my site. I'm also I went to this webinar thing the other day where they're like, if you want people to sign up to your newsletter, offer something for free. So I put together this free 10-chapter sample, which people get if you sign up to the newsletter. And where does that leave us? Oh yeah, so because I'm silly and like to fill in every possible bit of free time I have, I thought, hey, I'm going to do another side project. I'm going to make another thing that I have no experience in doing, and decided to do a podcast. So this kind of started from Google Fonts, where they were casually interested in making a podcast. And I started putting together a proposal for it. And then they decided that wasn't something they wanted to do, but the idea kind of stuck in my head by that point. So I thought, oh, yeah, I do want to do this podcast. So I kind of rounded up my type friends, again, hence the name, and put this together, and it was great fun. It's just 8 episodes per season, with a little nod to 8 Faces. I've only done the first season so far. I got to write the theme music as well, which was fun, although it does remind me of that Little Britain sketch with Dennis Waterman. And I've got some great people on there, so go and give it a listen. It's on all the usual places you can find podcasts, or hellotypefriends.com aggregates it all as well. Now, the weird thing is, did I do this? I did do it. So I've got a thick blue line coming from the podcast, from Hello Type Friends, going back to the second decade of my day job, so now where we're at. And that's maybe weird because it's not like I did design for the podcast that fed into that, but it's more doing the podcast kind of helped, I guess, kind of solidify in some of my clients' minds that I was still involved in these various different type projects. So I started doing, not necessarily explicitly because of the podcast, but it certainly helped keep me on their radar, I think. And I started doing a bunch of work for this company called the Type Founders, who have acquired a bunch of really great indie type foundries. So we did ivyfoundry.com, designed this last year, but it launched a few weeks ago. And recently did one for some Proxima Nova typeface, probably most of you know. This was recently expanded upon to have other scripts. So there's Devanagari, Thai, Greek, Arabic, there's Hebrew coming, there's Hangul coming. And this was a really interesting project because they wanted me to design the site, but also to write and curate the content for it as well, which basically meant me interviewing all these other foundries who they had commissioned to create these other scripts. And so that was really fun and a really nice combination of the kind of design stuff, type stuff, writing about type and design stuff. So that was really nice. I probably shouldn't link to this because I think they're still working on it. I think they're going to announce it on Monday, but the new P22 site is also another thing I've done for them, which sort of, is, I think, live right now, but technically launches on Monday. And that was a huge one, lots and lots of fonts there. Where do we get to from there? Oh, yeah, okay, so, and then, again, doing all of these different type things, various different type projects, again, I think, helped have me sort of stay on the radar of some of these kind of type-centric companies. And I'm now back at Adobe Fonts, just as a consultancy thing for 6 months or so, working on a project with them, which has been great because there's a bunch of my old team is still there. So it's been nice to be like, let's redesign this site. Who would build this thing like this? This looks rubbish. Why do we ever do that? And they're like, oh, you did that, Elliot, 10 years ago. Like, yeah, okay, shit. But one thing I've been doing over the last couple of years, and a bit more seriously in the last year or so, I suppose, is this newsletter that Michelle mentioned. Thank you, Michelle, for the really kind words about that. And I was very skeptical about starting a newsletter because I feel like everyone's starting a newsletter. Like, it's so, I mean, I'm a really slow, like, bandwagon jumper. Like, I start newsletters years after that craze is gone. I start a podcast years after everyone's on a podcast. But I was very skeptical. I was like, I don't want another thing in my inbox. Why would I pollute people's inboxes with yet another thing? But actually, I've really come round to the idea, I think because social media sucks so much at the moment, and that as any creator out there, you basically have to like just make all this other auxiliary content just for some people to see what you're doing. The newsletter, I don't mean mine, but newsletters as a whole, I think offer this way of having a smaller but much more engaged audience. So I love the idea. When I started writing the newsletter, I was like, oh, it's just going to be like a blog, isn't it? But it's going to be in an email format. But no, it feels different somehow. It's like you connect with people. It's almost a little bit like writing. You know, like, did anyone get, or anyone's parents used to get those cards like at Christmas where like the old neighbor would like summarize their whole year and like send you this little update. And you're like, everyone hates getting them, but like somehow there is something kind of nice in that, of this like little very personal, like here's some stuff that's been going on. So this newsletter has been a way for me to just write about fonts and include some nice graphics about fonts and sort of try and stay on top of all this stuff and share the things that I found. But also a really nice way to connect with people, and obviously smatterings of like, hey, here's this other project I've just done and things like that. So I really do believe in newsletters as a medium. This is what the recent one looked like. So just taking away all the arrows and all the other projects, you can see that most of what we've got left here is everything that was a side project. And as I said, there were some of those were small-ish and don't or haven't taken up much time. Some of those took up a huge amount of time where I had to sort of do them instead of client work. Some of them brought in some money. Some of them didn't bring in any money in. And all of them fluctuated between that as well. So there was never like, this is successful and this is not. Like, things are successful at different times. My wife and I were talking about the other day, we're like, oh, you know, the magazine wasn't successful. We didn't do it. Like, well, if you look at almost any other magazine, any other product, at some point, it folds or they stop doing it or whatever. Like, what is success? Is it that it lasts for all time? That something continues in perpetuity? I don't think that is. I think it's about doing something for the moment, and did you enjoy it? Did other people enjoy what you did? So I hope that's kind of like, that's my vision, that I still feel that it was successful. And all of these projects have been fun to do, and they've all been driven by just sort of wanting to do something and not necessarily worrying about whether it was the sensible thing to do or whether I knew how to do that thing. But all of these side projects, whether they be design-based or writing-based or all sorts, so even some music stuff or the podcast, all, I feel, have fed into things. So some are you can draw a very explicit line of, well, I did this for the magazine and then I got employed to do that because I learned that particular thing in the magazine. Lots of them are a bit more vague. But I think in terms of sort of, as I say, sort of being on folks' radar, keeping, showing that you're putting things out there into the world, definitely these different projects, and in many ways they all kind of stem from 8 Faces, the first magazine I did, have really helped with actually getting paid client work, for sure. There's peaks and troughs, it's up and down, of course. There are times when I was writing the book, my deadline was the end of the school summer holidays, and my wife was working, and I needed to look after the kids. I didn't want to put the kids into daycare throughout the holidays, so in order to do that and finish writing the book, I just basically had to give up client work for a couple of months. Which was obviously, a privileged position to be in, but I had built up a buffer before doing that, so I could kind of then take a little bit more of a risk. And I think this is kind of the way that it's tended to go, and that I encourage folks to do, that even If times are a bit tough, then maybe you can't take those risks and kind of go, hey, I'm going to throw it all in and just embark on this crazy side project idea. But if you can take the money for a bit, build yourself a little bit of a buffer, a little bit of a safety zone, and then go, okay, now I'm going to then take a little bit of a risk and maybe not worry too much if this particular thing doesn't bring in the money. That seems to work. And, again, that defies conventional wisdom. Conventional wisdom would say, oh, you're successful, you're at this point in your career, you should be earning this, you should be going up in this kind of, constant gradient. And I don't think so, because it really is about happiness and pursuing what you actually want to do. And I'm okay being happier and taking a massive pay cut for a bit if that allows me to pursue something, because I know that probably at some point that will then feed into a project which is going to pay some money, and then we can build up that buffer again. So I feel like there are definitely ways to do this and to be sensible about it. As I said, I haven't necessarily put loads of thought into that, but I think as the years have gone on, it's been easy to see these patterns in hindsight and do at least a degree of planning for that. So to bring it back to this rather tenuous link to design systems, that idea of when that horrible feeling of having to detach your components because it's not working, it's your planning has not gone as planned. When you then look back and see all of these various different other components you've made, again, with the gift of hindsight, looking at the bigger picture of what it is you're trying to achieve, then there's always that lovely feeling of being able to select them and then combine as variants, that actually you can smush them all together and that one master component actually does make sense, that you're actually not necessarily being totally crazy, that they are all part of some kind of vague master plan, even if you're not entirely sure what the master plan is yourself. I won't get you to read this, but my internet friend Luis Mendo, who's a very talented illustrator, a Spanish guy that lives in Japan, he's recently launched his membership program, earlier this week, in fact. And one of the things that he said, he talks about always doing what you love and how it will lead to paid client work. He talks about this big project that he did, which led to him getting approached by an illustration agency and then lots of really big projects because of that. He also did something where he did these iOS stickers, and he gave them away. I think you've got to pay for them now, but he gave them away to begin with. And he said that it was downloaded 90,000 times, and it's not about, because it was free, so he didn't get any money for that, but that's not how he measures success, that he just did it because he wanted to have fun, and he did have fun doing it. And I think that's fantastic. There's a quote I came across the other day by the author John Irving, who said, if you're lucky enough to find a way of life you love, you have to find the courage to live it, which I think is really, really sage advice. And I certainly am not here to say, you should do what I've done and recreate stuff, because loads of the stuff I've done has not worked. And there's been loads of moments of worry and despair and lots of feeling that it's not necessarily the right thing. But generally speaking, I think that it's possible to go, actually, was it the right thing to do to follow the kind of projects that I believed in, the stuff I love? And I can say, yes, it is. I'm old now, I can say that. So I would encourage you to do the same thing as well, if you can. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elliot.